Hello, I'm Jim Cornell, and this is Base to Base, the weekly biotech podcast from Air Coastal Media. Yes, welcome again to the Base to Base Biotech podcast, and this is number 27, going out on September the 19th. It's Raspberry Day, but not the fruit. It's about increasing awareness of the neurological condition cavernoma, where the lesions look a bit like raspberries. And today is also Concussion Awareness Day. And that's a good thing too, because for far too long, concussions weren't really taken that seriously, especially in sports. It's also the day of the first ever Glastonbury Festival, which was in 1970, and for birthdays, Adam West, in my opinion, the only Batman. And I realise that others will disagree, like everyone in my family. And this week I'm recording the podcast early, because when this comes out, I'll be doing interviews at Life Sciences Baltics in the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius. Last week, because it was Stand Up to Cancer Day, we had 3 chats with Poolbeg Pharma, Kling Bio and Curve Therapeutics on various aspects of the fight against cancer. This week we're marking Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, which is September, with an interview with Paul Romness, CEO of OS Therapies. And we also have a conversation with IMUNON's CEO, Stacy Lindborg, on ovarian cancer, immunotherapy, COVID, and a few other things. If you do have news or suggestions for who should be on the podcast, or indeed any other suggestions or comments, please do get in touch at jim@deeptechdigest.com, which is also the address you can use if you're interested in advertising with us or sponsoring a podcast episode. This week we don't have a roundup of the news because that would be kind of difficult considering I'm putting this together the week before. So you'll just have to head over to deeptechdigest.com for all the latest news. So first this week it's Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and one such cancer is osteosarcoma, a terrible disease that tends to affect mostly teenagers. It's also very much an area of unmet need, and one company looking to make a real difference here is OS Therapies. To tell us what they're doing in the field, we had a conversation with the company's CEO, Paul Romness. Hi Paul, thanks so much for chatting with us today. Maybe we could start with some information on the origins of OS Therapies.
Certainly, Jim, thank you. Paul Romness, founder and CEO of OS Therapies. We started OS Therapies around personal reason. My daughter's best friend was diagnosed with osteosarcoma in February of 2017. And if you don't know much about osteosarcoma, you're blessed. It translates quite literally to bone cancer. It usually occurs in teenagers after puberty when the long bones, proximal humerus, distal femur, proximal tibia come together. And there's a miscalculation in that fusing of the bone growth plates. And for some reason, 0.03 per 100,000 people around the world get it. Boys get a little more than girls, but this bone just starts ultra replicating and becomes very aggressive. Surgically, like most other solid tumors, you resect it and you blast the body with chemo. And if it doesn't come back, you live with the side effects of the chemo and the surgery, which usually is either amputation, limb sparing. But if it comes back to the lungs and the brain, like most solid tumors, and that's where you have a precipitous drop in survival. So when Olivia got sick, I figured we got to do something about it. I'd been in the biopharma industry for a long time. I often tell the end of the story, she's doing great. She just started UCLA med school, but unfortunately about half the kids pass away from this disease. So it's pretty brutal.
What's the diagnosis for it? How does somebody know that they've got it?
So a lot of times it goes untreated for a while, which is, as you might expect, very bad for cancer because then it gets outside its primary location and gets to the lungs and the brain and other parts of the body before it's identified. And it turns out a lot of these kids are athletes, and so they think maybe they have a sore knee or sore shoulder, and finally they'll get it x-rayed and someone knows what they're doing. When they look at the x-rays, they'll see some scalping or some really interesting stuff around the growth plates. Unfortunately, often missed at that point as well. But then once they realize that it's there, the treatment is the same no matter where you are in the world, pretty much. It's 2 months of chemo, cisplatin, doxorubicin, and methotrexate. Then surgical removal, either by amputation or by limb sparing or some other techniques. And then another 7 months of this brutal chemo. It's considered the worst chemo regimen in cancer. And 10% of the kids pass away just from the chemo and radiation. Then they have to live with those side effects, and then they have to wait, and they do scans every 3 months and just waiting to see if the cancer is coming back. And about half of them, it does come back, but it doesn't come back to their original location, much like other solid tumors. When family members, friends have breast cancer, they have the cancer removed, they get blasted with chemo like they do, and some immunotherapies. When it comes back, it doesn't come back to the breast, it comes back to the lungs. So very similar mechanism of action. And that's why we think, which is relatively important for us and for the business model of OS Therapies, is that if it works in osteosarcoma, it should work in some of these other tough cancers as well. And, in the U.S., I know you're UK based, but in the U.S., we still have 40,000 people a year dying of breast cancer. So I think we could do better there too.
Are there any other treatments currently other than that awful chemo that you were describing?
Not at all. And, if they do recur, there is no real standard of care. If it does metastasize to the lungs, they get those metastases removed. There is no real standard of care. It's really up to the patients, their parents, and the treating physicians or healthcare providers, wherever they are in the world. Some they just resect, some they try the chemo again, some they try some other things, but there's been no new treatments for osteosarcoma in 40 years. We hope to be the first. We had our first meeting with the FDA a week ago, 2 weeks ago this Wednesday. We have another meeting with them on Friday. We have 2 or 3 more meetings to meet with them, make sure they're up to speed on the disease. But yeah, there's been nothing new.
When people talk about unmet medical need, this is about as unmet as you can get pretty much then.
Yeah, and ironically, it's 1,000 patients in the US. It's 20,000 patients globally. Ironically, and we do have the indication for dogs, canines get osteosarcoma in the US 30 times, 40 times more often, and in the UK, all around the world. But there are 30 to 40,000 dogs a year that get osteosarcoma in the United States, and there's been no treatment for that. We're looking to partner with a potential animal health company or spin off our own animal health company, and that would be the first new treatment for osteosarcoma for dogs in a long time as well.
So maybe then you could tell me a little bit about your lead asset and how that was developed initially and also how it works.
Sure. So when Olivia got sick, I read in Pink Sheets that a company out of Princeton was divesting of a phase 2B asset in osteosarcoma. The more I looked into it, it's some technology out of the University of Pennsylvania, and it was designed by Dr. Yvonne Patterson. She had a friend in the veterinary school, Dr. Nicola Mason, who said, I think we could probably use this on dogs. This osteosarcoma is very aggressive in dogs. It's very prevalent. And so they did a phase 1 and then subsequently did a phase 3 trial in canines, and it worked very well. 3x improvement in overall survival and disease progression. Very minimal side effects. And I heard about the technology. I reached out to the company. We started a company. As I had the chance of meeting a bunch of key opinion leaders in osteosarcoma at a conference. And I said to them, look, we're going to start a company. We're going to in-license this technology that you guys think is pretty promising. Will you be on our scientific advisory board? And all 8 of them that I emailed that day responded to me that day. So that was kind of the first indication that we had some good technology. So we started the company and licensed the technology, did the phase 2B trial that finished last October, so almost a year ago. Minimal side effects. What we're doing is firing up the immune system. So it's an immunotherapy, what I call an off-the-shelf immunotherapy. We're giving the body a attenuated or weakened Listeria with a HER2 vector fused to it. The body sees the Listeria and just freaks out. The immune system explodes. It's like a 5-alarm fire. And the body tells the lymph nodes to start secreting lymphocytes or T cells that go out and find the micrometastases that have actually survived the chemo. And so, as our chief medical and scientific officer, who's also a founding scientist, the founding founder of this technology, says it's only the immune system that can go from a cell to cell level saying, are you a good cell? Are you a bad cell? And so that's why we think we have the minimal side effects. We have, the effectiveness of killing these micrometastases. And I think the more we get into this with additional clinical trials and additional indications, certainly after FDA approval, then I think, we get a chance to really see how this immune system really spreads and starts working out to kill those bad cancer cells.
Is this something that you've mentioned, the fact that it's been around for such a long time with no real treatments or no advances in treatments? Why has nobody else kind of taken this on, or are there other companies trying to deal with it as well?
There wasn't a lot of awareness. Before we started the company, we actually started a nonprofit, oscollaborative.org. The goal of the nonprofit was really to encourage people to do such things. And we want competition in osteosarcoma. I think, the more shots on goal that all of us have, the more success we'll have at addressing this disease. But there's nothing near us in the pipeline. And I think probably one of the reasons is the low incidence level. It's financially a tough challenge too, right? Because before, when we only had the osteosarcoma indication and we didn't have the canine indication and we didn't have the other solid tumor indications, it was a pretty tough sell to investors. Now that we have all those shots on goal, obviously, if we do get approved, by September 30th of next year, we get what's called a priority review voucher from the FDA, which we can sell on the open market. And that has a current market value of about $150, $160 million. So that would be non-dilutive capital for the company. And then we could advance our other indications and our other platform technology. That's our first shot at an approval with the FDA. And I think it was in hindsight, it was a pretty brilliant business model to go with a rare pediatric disease, because we can get that priority review voucher, we can get through the clinical trial faster. But to your point, Jim, it was unmet medical need that started all of this.
Speaking of the clinical trials process, where are you on that?
As we mentioned earlier, we did finish the end of phase 2. We did do the phase 2B trial, finished in October of 2024. We did our end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA 2 Wednesdays ago. We presented to the UK HMRA, which is the FDA equivalent in the UK, for our ILAP application, which is an expedited application. We've presented some data to them. We've also got a presentation next week with the EMA, the Netherlands branch of the EMA. So we're really pushing hard for global approval of this first indication for osteosarcoma with OST-HER2. But after that, we'll take the rest of the pipeline and target some other solid tumors as well.
For those that are suffering from osteosarcoma, what's your goal, or what do you consider to be success?
The first thing is increasing overall survival. And when we started the company, that OS stood for osteosarcoma. But now that we have other indications, overall survival is really the barrier to entry with the FDA, but it's what matters most to patients, right? And their families. Am I alive or am I not? And so if we can help prevent the metastases from occurring or reoccurring, then I think we significantly improve overall survival. And if that's a new option for patients, and we plan to be as global as we can be with this indication, then that's success to me. And that's really, frankly, life success to me, is if I can increase the overall survival in just one small cancer, I'm good. But think if we expand that out to other solid tumors and increase overall survival for them too.
That would be excellent news for an awful lot of people, which is excellent. Yeah. Is it today that the company's giving a presentation at the Rare Trials Summit?
Actually, one of our advisors, our statistical advisor, Dr. Luis Rojas, is presenting, actually just finished presenting He was presenting immediately following the folks from the FDA Rare and Pediatric Disease Departments and was highlighting the importance of clinical trials in this space and how you can generate data to compare to the clinical trial and how important single-arm trials are. The FDA historically has the process of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. Phase 3 trials usually not just, it's all around efficacy, but they usually have a double-blind placebo arm. So they have one trial where the patients are receiving the drug, and then the other arm, they're not receiving the drug. And the problem with osteosarcoma and a lot of other rare disease, very deadly diseases is, one, what parent or what patient wants to be in a trial where you have a 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 chance of receiving the placebo. Two, if it's that deadly a disease and you're giving placebo, most people would think it's a very ethical choice. So there were over 60 approvals last year from the FDA with single arm phase 1, phase 2 trials. So we have an FDA and MHRA and EMA that will get us to approval. They just need to understand the disease better.
Is there much understanding in the, not just at the FDA level, but in general of the disease? And also, like, what's the reaction like when you talk about this to other people at conferences and whatever, because it's not really been tackled in 40 years?
That was one of the parts of why we started the nonprofit, and I think that's been very successful. Our efforts, are taking the company public a year ago in August of 2024 has helped us with promoting the disease, which is important. But it's part of our job, right, is to tell about the disease. Unfortunately, when people do know about the disease, they often don't have very good results. So when they do know about the disease, we don't really need to describe how deadly it is. Sometimes they may not be as knowledgeable about the lack of options for the patient, but I think if they know that the survival rate is so poor, then they must realize that the medical options aren't very good either. It's usually a relatively serious conversation. Unfortunately, almost all, if not all, of the parents that I deal with have lost children. Turns out there's this, I don't know if it's a fight or flight or just human psychology, but when you and your child survive a very deadly cancer, rare disease, you run from the disease. But when you lose a child, you have to channel that energy. So most of the parents that are involved in the osteosarcoma community are either battling the disease with their children or have lost their children, or the rare case of an adult that actually had the disease that still survived.
How important are things like September is Children's Cancer Awareness Month? How important are awareness days and months to getting the word out?
If they're connected to action, they're great. More funding, more government funding for pediatric cancer. The current administration in the United States, the European efforts, the UK efforts around pediatric cancers has been fantastic. Making sure that the regulatory bodies keep up with that are going to be just as important. As I've described, our FDA and our NIH is this huge NIH that's generating great information and knowledge, but there's just this little spigot at the bottom that's the FDA getting the approvals through. So a new product doesn't mean anything if it doesn't get to the patient. I know that seems obvious, but we can have good results, and the regulatory process is demanding, and it should be. We want safe, effective drugs. But the first barrier to entry really is safety, and we've clearly covered that, and we've also shown that there's response to our therapy. So we're very confident that we'll get the FDA here in the next 12 months, if not sooner.
You mentioned some of the other things that you're working on. Could you tell me a little bit more about your other assets and the other conditions that you're tackling?
Sure. In addition to the osteosarcoma and the HER2 platform, where we'll pivot to other solid tumors, esophageal cancer, breast cancer, colorectal cancer, for instance, we also have a technology which is called an antibody drug conjugate, or ADC. That's really been the hot subject in biotechnology over the last 24 months, if it's not a weight loss drug. And an ADC, antibody drug conjugate, as I describe it, is like having a guided missile that attracts to a certain part of the body. In this case, it's a different protein that cancer may be expressing. And on that ADC or that guided missile, we have a bunch of different payloads. In our ADC, we can change the payload, we can change the number of payloads, we can change the types of payloads, we can mix up to 3 different types of payloads. And if you think about chemotherapy, it has massive side effects, and it affects the rest of the body, unfortunately. While it's trying to kill off the cancer, it's trying to kill you. Well, our ADC, the cool thing about it and our special sauce or our IP is that those payloads, either they're toxic or they're not, they can be a monoclonal antibody, mRNA, a chemotherapy, but by wrapping them with silicone and then attaching them to that ADC, that cruise missile, with silicone, those payloads are inactive. So they don't have as many side effects until it gets attracted to the cancer environment. And it turns out the cancer environment has a lower pH level or higher acidity and eats away at that silicone. And then the payload is dropped in and around the cancer environment. The silicone gets eaten away from the payload with that higher pH level, lower pH level, or higher acidity. And then that chemotherapy or that other payload goes active and is more effective, more efficient, and has less side effects. And so we are looking to develop that as soon as we get approval from the FDA and get that money from that PRV. But that's some really hot technology that we think will have a lot of uses in other solid tumors. So that's why our tagline is osteosarcoma and other solid tumors, Jim.
Where do you go from here, I guess?
So the number one is getting approval and getting on the market with osteosarcoma. Then we pivot to other solid tumors with either a bundle or phase 3 trial in breast cancer. And then we actually have some data from another trial in prostate cancer that we'll be announcing soon. That trial has been completed. There are other shots on goal with that OST HER2 kind of platform technology. And then we pivot to the ADC technology, and we've got some chemistry, basic chemistry to do 2-week and GLP tox trials that we need to get through before we can start putting that in humans, get an IND to do that in human trials. And that's also at some point, once we get those basic trials done, it could be a huge out-licensing opportunity.
And you also mentioned the canine aspect as well. I mean, there's the potential to do something there as well, I guess.
Very much so. We've been very clear that we're looking for a partner or we'll spin that off, and we're getting closer to that every day.
Now we're moving to a very wide-ranging conversation that includes immunotherapy, ovarian cancer, COVID, and more, as these are just some of the areas IMUNON is taking on with its technology platforms. We had a conversation with the company's CEO, Stacy Lindborg. Hi Stacy, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Maybe we could start with a little bit of background on the company.
Absolutely. IMUNON is a clinical stage biotech company. In fact, we're in phase 3, which is very exciting, a very important stage for the company over the course of our existence. We're culminating to a very exciting time. Our headquarters is in Princeton, New Jersey, and we have clinical GMP grade labs near Huntsville, Alabama, which we are producing the active pharmaceutical ingredient for our product in the ongoing phase 3 trial. We're focusing, as always, on advancing our portfolio of innovative treatments, and specifically with our immunotherapies and vaccine, we're leveraging DNA-based technologies really in a novel way to treat cancer and then also to explore the potential in the vaccine world.
And what kind of things are you looking at the company?
We have 2 different technology platforms, and one called TheraPlas, which is an immuno-oncology gene therapy. It's a lot of words that carries an enormous amount of importance in terms of what makes this product novel. I'll start with that technology platform, and the lead product is IMUNON-01, where we're targeting ovarian cancer, women that are newly diagnosed. So this is a frontline treatment, and it's an area that really does not have much going on in the R&D space, because it's been a place where we've seen a lot of attempts and also a lot of failures. So we stand alone in having a phase 3 trial there, and we have data that I bet we'll talk about that really highlights the unique potential that we have. But from a disease standpoint, in case you're not close to it, the disease epithelial ovarian cancer is almost always fatal. It's diagnosed in late stage in about 80% of the patients, so stage 3B, stage 3C, and stage 4, because there really aren't unique symptoms that are allowing it to be identified and diagnosed sooner. And it results in about 20,000 new cases a year in the US and about 300,000 worldwide. So it is a really core unmet need. It's the 5th leading cause of cancer mortality in women. And what's also been very challenging is that the unmet need is so great because we've seen that the standard of care has largely remained unchanged for 25 years. I'd love to dive into the evidence that we have, but maybe I'll quickly touch on our other technology platform for completeness. So we have a second platform, which is also a DNA-based vaccine. It's actually a derivative of our original technology platform. So we call it Placine. It's a novel vaccine platform, and we're equally as excited by this platform. We've generated some exciting data. We chose to use proof of concept in the COVID disease because it was a contemporary, we could generate comparative data. But we know we have some real advantages in terms of stability, ease of being able to distribute the product. We have stability data that suggests that we have up to a year at refrigerated temperatures. The product remains stable in about a month at room temperatures. The manufacturing is simple and very cost effective. The early proof of concept data, so the phase 1 trial that we completed, actually shows it's safe, it's immunogenic, and also that we have 6-month durability against multiple variants. And this is, something that the current mRNA vaccines have not shown. But we have decided that as important as this technology is, that we're seeking partners to really move forward the development platform and or an acquisition. So the future development we expect will come either through partnerships or licensing.
Could you tell me a bit more about the TheraPlus platform and how that works?
Yes. When you think about both of these technology platforms and the place that we've chosen to focus, we're really looking at ways that we can harness immunotherapy. So the power of our body and our body's ability to fight illness. Oncology, obviously, is the primary focus for IMUNON 01. And so when I describe this, I use the words, it's an immunotherapy. Okay, so it's a DNA plasmid that is encoded with the IL-12 gene, which makes it a gene therapy. Okay, so this DNA plasmid, it's encased in a synthetic lipopolymer, a nanoparticle, and it facilitates the delivery of this plasmid directly into the nucleus of cells that are in women that have ovarian cancer. So it's actually going directly through a catheter into the peritoneal cavity. It allows for direct modification of the microtumor environment through local production. So we're not delivering a therapeutic in the sense of a large molecule or other approaches, but we're delivering, in essence, a recipe such that then the cells in these women start to express locally IL-12. So they start producing IL-12 in the peritoneum. We observe multiple fold increases in IL-12. So we know the product is working as intended. This is a really powerful anti-cancer fighting gene. And we observed not only in women and also from clinical trials, but also in preclinical experiments, that we not only see IL-12 levels increasing, but we see downstream effects. So other really powerful cytokines, including interferon gamma, and really fundamentally that we're changing the microtumor environment and really at impressive levels following treatment. And we know that this is very well understood. The field of immunotherapy dates back to the 1980s and really took on a whole course that has proven to be very successful in other cancers. But it really came back to the discovery of IL-12 in a publication in the late 80s. And, the mechanism, therefore, is very well precedented. It's been highly sought after. But what's unique about what we've been able to accomplish is the ability to dose with multiple deliveries. So we've, in our most recent clinical trials, have been able to dose up to 17 weekly doses, and to be able to show that we're keeping systemic levels, so levels in blood, really unchanged and very low, which is where many companies and many drug development efforts that were trying to harness this powerful mechanism ran into toxicity challenges, and we've been able to avoid. We're measuring the fluid in the primary tumor environment, and we see multiple fold increases and also a really beautiful dose response, but then quite a clean safety profile.
You mentioned some of the challenges that others have faced. Were there challenges that you encountered, and what did you do to overcome some of those?
Yeah, so the primary challenge that's been, faced, when you think about the field of cancer, you're trying historically, we were trying to, of course, hit all the tumors with as much as we could, but of course we have to take into account the broader safety profile. So many of these, there were about 40 clinical trials that were run with an IL-12 mechanism in that period of a couple of decades after IL-12 was discovered. And they really all ran into safety challenges. So these were being administered systemically, so IV, the levels in blood. At first, IL-12 doesn't carry a very long half-life, so doses had to be high. And really, to get to an effective dose level, there obviously always has to be work on that front. But these challenges, there were significant toxicities that were observed and some deaths in clinical trials. So the amount of work that was done in the IL-12 space, it remained promising, but it was an ability to safely administer and dose. So, we're delighted that we have not faced that primary hurdle. In fact, we still have not hit dose-limiting toxicities from a safety perspective, nor a maximum tolerated dose. We've studied a range of doses, and really our data from the most recent phase 2 trial suggests that, and this is the same dose we're taking and we're now studying in phase 3, 100 milligrams per meter squared. It suggests when we look at our biological response that we could be hitting a plateau in terms of some of the biological and translational data that we're looking at. So we see in a clinically meaningful effect observed, which I'll take you through, but a profile that really shows a really strong benefit risk profile. So the safety, our DSMB that monitored our most recent trial very closely, as well as our PIs have described, the safety profile that we're observing really is, our product is being administered in combination with the standard of care platinum chemotherapy. So we, of course, see side effects, nausea, vomiting, GI, that are common with platinum-based chemotherapy that can be managed. We're seeing some abdominal pain and have evolved in the course of the phase 2 trial and continued with the 2 ongoing trials to now have a proactive pain management protocol, which is really effectively addressing that. So, really when we compare back to previous attempts at harnessing IL-12, I'd say we've succeeded where other attempts failed. And I think, then we're in a place where just like any other company with a really powerful potential with the product, needing to work through getting the phase 2 trial enrolled as quickly as possible and replicate the findings that we observed in phase 2.
Could you maybe go into a bit more detail on some of those clinical trials?
Yes, so I'll focus on the phase 2 trial that we completed. This trial is the largest trial that we've done to date. It's actually a very good-sized, very scientifically sound trial for phase 2. It had 112 patients randomized to 2 different treatment arms, which enabled really clean view into what was the effect that IMUNON is adding to the standard of care. So we had the first arm was the standard of care platinum-based chemotherapy. This is what really all women will receive. They'll be, when they're diagnosed, they meet with a surgeon. And if they're eligible for neoadjuvant treatment, which means that there's an advantage to shrink the tumor before surgery, Then women will receive the standard of care chemotherapy. That's the control arm. The experimental arm has the same standard of care, but then we add IMUNON 001 to it. And when you think about the context that we have not seen an improvement in the overall survival of women in any ovarian cancer trial, frontline treatment, right? So we're talking right after diagnosis, one of the hardest periods in a patient's life to show a treatment effect because there's so little that's known about these women. They've just gotten a diagnosis. They're going straight into a trial. We, of course, know that there are some women that won't respond to chemotherapy. So there will be women that won't respond. That brings noise into a trial. It's a very important stage to tackle. But when you think about all the attempts that have gone after this, up until the recent OVATION 2 trial, we've never seen a trial be able to demonstrate an overall survival benefit. So what's really amazing is in this trial, so we read out the data last summer, and then we took a separate cut of overall survival data, which our protocol, indicated we would continue for about a year to monitor survival. So all the rest of the data was read out at the end of the trial last summer. And in the overall survival data, we initially saw that we were prolonging the median overall survival 11 months over the standard of care. When we looked 7 months after that database lock, we actually saw it grow. So it grew to 13 months. So we're talking about being able to extend life over what the current regimen for treating ovarian cancer in this frontline treatment over a year, which when you think about the significance of that, I mean, there are multiple ways we can kind of assess it. Number one, in the medical community, it's very unusual to be given a platform presentation at ASCO, especially in a phase 2 setting. Those are often reserved for pivotal trials and really the point where products are coming on the market. And we not only received a platform presentation at this year's ASCO, but we had a simultaneous publication that read out the trial results. So in the setting itself, after our study PI presented our data, we actually had a participant in the room that got up and remarked at how significant of a milestone this was for ovarian cancer. So this really is the kind of response that we're hearing and what gives us, an incredible amount of hope that we'll be able to, with replication of this data in phase 3, that we'll be able to change the standard of care.
Obviously, that's a big success in itself, but what does the future of ovarian cancer care look like if you're able to do this? Are you looking to be able to extend that even more, or what is the future for patients that have this horrible disease?
It's a great question, Jim, and I've been in the world of R&D development and drug development for almost 3 decades, and with all of these really horrific diseases, what you really hope is to make progress, to bring a much needed advancement to care. And then you expect that then we'll continue to be able to learn and grow and further the long-term impact. And we are already thinking about, well, could you actually, after this frontline treatment, so right now the protocol is 17 weeks of treatment, could we allow for maintenance care? This is part of the standard of care that you'll see. In fact, many women, especially those that are HRD positive, they'll receive PARP inhibitors and maintenance therapy. I didn't touch on that, but we should come back to, places where we saw an even bigger effect in our trial. But we're actually studying right now, we have 2 ongoing trials that are enrolling patients, the phase 3 trial and one that's in minimal residual disease. And in that trial, there are 2 really novel components. Number one, we know that many physicians like to treat with bevacizumab. And in that trial, we're studying and assessing if IMUNON plus chemotherapy could be safely administered in the same setting with bevacizumab. And then the second part that will give unique insights that we can build on as we learn, will be that women have an opportunity to receive IMUNON treatment and maintenance therapy as warranted by the protocol. So that's one aspect that will, I think we'll have some insights on long before the phase 3 trial is done, and that will inform future research. But I would say that, when we look at the phase 2 data and we observe, this phenomena that these women who are HRD positive, and therefore the majority in phase 2 that were HRD positive received PARP inhibitors as part of their treatment, we saw this even greater differentiation of a treatment effect versus the overall intent to treat protocol. And, that's largely thought that this is driven as much by the HR deficiency status of these women as it is that they receive PARP inhibitors. And, we know that ovarian cancer is so important to be able to activate the immune system so the tumors are cold. We want them to be hot, and then immunotherapies can then have targets to advance and to fight. And so as we look at these early findings and really what we're confirming in phase 3, targeting a very specific subgroup as well of the HRD positive, if we have the ability to convert, and it appears we are, to really take what was immunologically cold, turn the tumors hot, and then see an effect, this could end up being a very ripe advance for other immune therapies that have not been successful in the front line. We've seen immunotherapies in front line that have multiple trials that have read out in the past year and didn't show any signal in overall survival. So there very likely will be components that are built on and will continue to allow with each step to give us new scientific challenges and endeavors to help patients.
Are you studying the fact that you mentioned some of the people that, or some of the women that you're treating are seeing better than average survival rates? Are you studying that as to why that is and how potentially that could be utilized to help people that it doesn't work as well on, and also improve the numbers for those that it is working on?
Yeah, and I think that what I was just kind of going into in terms of the ovarian cancer and what's really known about the tumors being inactive, they're cold. So to really engage and to train and have a target for the immune system, that is one really core component that we believe gives us insight into why this subgroup, saw this even larger response. And, one other point about, this trial and the data. So we saw in women that received PARP inhibitors, and again, we believe that it's likely as much due to the fact that they receive PARP inhibitors, but also that they have this biomarker, which is very well established, HRD, HR deficiency, that we know really allows for the formation of neoantigens that the immune system could recognize as targets. So it kind of gets back to really enabling an immune system to be activated. If I go back to the broader set of our trial results, so we talked about overall survival. I didn't touch on any other endpoint, or, really I gave you this median difference over the standard of care. That was in an all-comers population. Okay, so an even more differentiated effect in women who were HRD positive and also women who received PARP inhibitors. Those really were very similar, one and the same in the trial. What's really remarkable in this trial, so we look at the HRD positive patients. So half of the women, I can't give you that change, that delta in the median survival, because half of the women in the IMUNON arm to this day remain alive, more than half of the women. In the standard of care, we reached the median at the time of the first data readout, but the hazard ratio, was down around the 0.4 range, which is a remarkably large effect. What's also very exciting, though, because that we saw this big effect in all patients, women who are HR proficient, so the other subgroup, right, that would then equal the total, we also saw favoring IMUNON. So we see a treatment benefit in both groups, just a larger one in women that are treated that are HR deficient, that have this genetically defined biomarker that we can measure. And we're including that central to our phase 3 trial, which will be very important. But we also saw the consistency of effect. If you look at all of the clinical endpoints that were collected and were identified, written into the protocol, we consistently, so progression-free survival, we have chemotherapy response score, surgical response score, the response rate in all of these, and also in the translational data, in every single subgroup that we identified and across all these endpoints, we see an advantage, a treatment benefit to IMUNON. So the signal is exceptionally clear, and it sets us up then to take the important step of setting overall survival as the primary for phase 3, which we know is what patients care about. It's critical to regulators, and we believe this trial will set us up in other geographies because of that choice.
Could you tell me a bit more about your work on COVID and PlaCCine?
There's a lot that's known, about new pathogenic viruses. There have been about 80 that have been discovered since 1980. And I think what we were trying to do was really look at, we have this novel platform, an ability to expand beyond the technology that we already had in TheraPlas. We certainly saw COVID emerge and thought this could be an entry point to discover, could we actually create an adaptation in this new technology? And then where would the most important for society be to target for that to be, after we get through proof of concept that we've established the ability to safely administer it, that we could actually have this new platform really focus on a targeted antigen. In this case, we used COVID, as I said, COVID. And, we also have had interactions with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to understand what are the most urgent and important areas to focus. But effectively, what we did was establish the components that I briefly mentioned, that right now this would bring ease of distribution. There's relatively simple targeting of manufacturing as we, could move very quickly as we did with our proof of concept study to focus on a specific antigen that could be done with any number of antigens. But really what came out of the trial, so we ran a clinical trial. This was in healthy volunteers. And unlike, again, for this target, we haven't been able to see longer term durability from the commercially available vaccines. We studied out to 6 months, and we actually see that there are still 2 to 3-fold increases in neutralizing antibodies against multiple variants. And so it's a promising signal for this platform. And of course, we're very interested in where this could go, but we really want, since that will be through a partnership, our company and our core focus is in the oncology arena. So we're harnessing the value of our technology platforms, and we want advancements to continue, but we really want that to come through a partner.
As if you weren't doing enough, is there anything else in the pipeline?
We're starting to think and refine our next indications, what would be prime targets, and think about ways that we can be advancing that. It's a little bit early for me to go into that now. Right now, we're laser focused, of course, on this potential, which I think is really, really an amazing opportunity. It's an honor for us as a company to think about that we have in our hands the potential to reset the standard of care for ovarian cancer. So we are laser focused on our phase 3 trial and ensuring we do that with utmost quality and speed.
You gave me the numbers for the number of people in the US and around the world that have that. Is it something that you hope you'll be able to roll out on a worldwide basis to help more people?
There's no question that ovarian cancer is a globally unmet need, and it occurs really proportionately to the sample, the size of populations around the world. We are having conversations in some geographies to see if we can accelerate, geographies that really would be ideal to run trials locally. We also believe, and when we look at drug development from lots of different lenses, right? I've been in big pharma for a lot of my career. We know that many geographies can leverage US data. And so we will do everything we can, and we'll have our strategy really buttoned up this year of what that development plan looks like. But there is no doubt there's global unmet need, and it's something that we would expect to set as a target to really be able to touch the lives across the world.
So what are the next steps for the company as you move forward?
Raise capital. We're as a biotech company without revenue. We're in a really strong position because of the strength of our data, but we are working to continue to bring in financing. We expect to really fund this trial in whole, and we've taken some really creative steps to make sure that we know we can finance the HRD population. And so we're hoping to start in that cohort. It's the highest probability cohort and half of what the trial is that's planned. So really our focus is going to be financing the company and proceeding with the trial. And we're a nimble team, as biotech companies often are, but have immense talent and great expertise in the company. So I really don't think we could be better positioned from a data and our team's perspective.
And would early diagnostics be significant?
When you think about novel therapeutics and really where there's been a lack of change in the standard of care for 25 years, I do think that it will be critical and it'll be so beneficial to the thousands of women that could be diagnosed in the future. As we make progress with therapeutics, that tends to bring on the emergence of diagnostics. And I think that's something that will be very exciting, to be thinking about, what potential ways we can advance that. Because right now, we would expect that if you have earlier diagnoses, that of course the outcome is going to be very different. So you have an effective therapeutic that remains to be seen in our phase 3 trial, but we have very strong reason to believe that we will be able to deliver this evolution to the standard of care. So then it would be this natural evolution of that we're actually gaining access and women are finding out sooner, which means that they can approach treatment sooner. And I think that is going to be very exciting. I've seen this happen in other diseases, very specifically with spinal muscular atrophy in the past. And, it was integrated into newborn screening, and it really has created an amazing transformation for these families that have this genetic mutation that results in SMA. We would hope that we could see something similar, especially for those that have elevated risks. The science is evolving.
Is it something that is easy to diagnose?
It is not, because of the lack of symptoms. So it would have to be something that would be very intentional. I mean, ovarian cancer, kind of at its core, the challenges are there really are nonspecific symptoms. And on top of it, there are no preventative screening tests that allow for early diagnosis. And that's the reason that we see advanced disease at the time of diagnosis. But these things you can tackle, but they don't tend to come. You think about what we've seen in terms of the ability to see in Alzheimer's disease plaque emerging, right? Until we actually saw the first therapeutics that had the ability to remove plaque, then you saw diagnostics that appeared. There's a motivation to then tackle the diagnostic space, and it would be really wonderful from a patient perspective, as well as, making sure people can get innovative treatments earlier.
One of the great things about doing a biotech podcast is the amount of hope that there is and the number of promising potential treatments there are out there. And it was exactly the same this week with OS Therapies earlier, and also with that conversation with IMUNON. Anyway, that's it for this week's podcast. If you are, like me, at Life Sciences Baltics, see you there. But regardless, until next week, wherever in the world you are, I hope you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Base to Base Biotech podcast. The Base to Base Biotech podcast is an Air Coastal Media Limited production.